All right, welcome here, everybody. Can you guys hear me okay? Brendan, can you hear me fine?
I can. Can you hear me?
I can hear you, yes.
I have not seen that mustache before.
You know what? I was going to shave it before coming on, but I ran out of time. So
You made the right decision.
it's life is limited, but it is now going to be forever on a recording somewhere. So we'll see.
Perfect.
Yeah. All right. So we've got a few people in attendance here. So that's awesome. We're here today with Pastor Brendan Devaney. We're on week 2 of our leadership track titled Moving Towards the Mess. I'm personally looking forward to hearing what Brendan has got for us today. But before we get started, I would like to ask a bit of a warm-up question, a bit of an icebreaker question. I know I haven't really had the opportunity actually to get to know Brendan very well yet. So this question is designed to get you to bare your heart a little bit.
I'm so nervous right now.
Yeah. So think long and hard about this one, but I'm curious, if you could be the leading world expert on any particular topic, which topic would you choose and why?
Man, I love it. And I'm going to make you answer that in a second. But for me, it is probably coffee bean roasting. I love it. You can ask my wife. She can tell you stories about me almost burning down our house when we lived in Winnipeg. It is a fantastic art and a science. And when I first started learning how to do it, I was warned to be very careful. Otherwise, you might have to call the fire department. I started laughing. And the coffee guys, he's like, no, seriously, you might, because you're roasting sugar, beans, oils, all these things at 550 degrees in your house. And makes a gross mess, but it's delightful. So that would be why. And it's just fun.
Okay.
Yeah. You?
Man, I should have actually thought about my answer. I'm not sure what my answer would be. I feel like there's lots of topics that I'd be interested in. And usually I jump from topic to topic. So in some ways, I don't spend enough time in one particular topic to actually consider myself an expert. But I would probably choose some kind of a scholarly pursuit. So maybe, right now I'm reading a biography on Paul, kind of putting him in the first century context. So maybe as it stands right now, first century Judaism, but I doubt I'd answer the same thing in a week from now. But
well, that's a little more academic than my answer.
Yeah, fair enough. For those of you who weren't here last week, Brendan led us through a leadership concept called the 3 A's of leadership.
Yep.
Maybe everyone here was here last week. I actually don't know that, but do you mind giving us the 1 to 2 minute recap? What are the 3 A's and why should people go back and watch that recording?
Totally. I think that when we read the New Testament, we read over this one really, really important conversation that God has with Jesus. And it's the only recorded out loud conversation. Obviously, they talked a lot. We assume that we know that, but this is the one conversation that we all got to eavesdrop in on. And you hear God say to Jesus that you are my son, whom I love, and with you I'm well pleased. And through that, we get this idea that by God, Jesus was affirmed, he was acknowledged, and he was adored. And as I read that for the very first time, it just got me thinking that, man, as an individual who's always trying to get, just to get in people's good books and to be liked and I want to impact people. Those are the 3 things that I always find are missing in my life. That idea that I want to be affirmed. I want to know that my place in this conversation, in this organization, in this friend group, whatever it is, I want to know that my place matters. I want to know that I'm appreciated, I'm adored, I'm affirmed, I'm acknowledged, all those things. And I think for the first, I don't know how many times I read that. It's in all 4 Gospels. I don't know how many times I read that I completely missed it and missed that side of it. So really, really important. And I think it applies to all types of leadership, parenting, work, school, friends, teammates. It doesn't matter. It applies to everybody. So I think it's really, really important. And I think we can all take it, whether you're a Christian or not a Christian. I think it's super important.
Okay, awesome. Appreciate that. And obviously today you'll be talking about a different topic, but still part of the leadership, which you've titled Moving Towards the Mess. and what it looks like to, or at least this is me filling it in, what it looks like to walk alongside imperfect people. So I'll just give everybody a quick reminder about the Q&A function that should pop up maybe at the bottom of your screen somewhere. Feel free throughout the session to, if a question comes to your mind, pop it into that Q&A function there, and we will have a time towards the end of today's session to address questions. So the more interaction, the better, as far as I'm concerned. And yeah, look forward to hearing what you have to say.
Awesome. Thanks, Kyle. So yeah, so we're gonna pick this up, and just to remind people that last week I talked just a little bit about sort of my story and who I am. So I've been in leadership now for about 10 or 12 years in different ways, and then in ways before that as well. But I've been here at the church as a senior executive pastor for coming up on 2 years now. Before that, at a large church in Winnipeg, and before that, I worked for the federal government, leading a department of about 250 people. And so so for me, it's not just experience, but it's also really enjoying books and podcasts and webinars and just the opportunity to learn, because it's really, really cool to see how people can really excel in life, where they are, whatever they're doing once they become better leaders. And that applies to home, school, work, everything, regardless of where people are, regardless of where you are in your faith journey. This applies to everybody, and it's so, so, so important. So I'm so glad that you've joined us last week and joined us this week, and then continue to join us next week when Scott talks. And I think if you haven't checked out Wednesday and Thursday, there's some amazing teaching happening there as well. So make sure to check in on that. But like Kyle said, today what we're going to talk about is this idea of moving towards the mess. And I think this is really, really, really important for all of us, because if we can get it right, we can change lives. We can see deeper connections. We can see more open and more honest relationships. And you can actually play a role in changing somebody's life just by willing to move towards their mess. And here's what we know. We're all messy people. Sometimes that mess is a result of something you've done, right? Something, a choice that you've made, whether it's financial or relationship, or you moved there when you should have moved there. You took that job when you did this, a poor decision, addictions, whatever it is. Sometimes the mess that you make, the baggage that you create, sometimes it's your own doing. We know that. But sometimes that mess that you're dealing with was brought to you by somebody else, or by circumstances out of anybody's control, right? Maybe somebody hurt you, maybe you got laid off from a job, and that just things spiraled. Maybe it was a bad relationship. Maybe it was somebody who took advantage of you physically or emotionally or mentally, whatever it is. But sometimes that mess is ours, that we've created. Sometimes that mess is somebody else created for us. And so the question becomes, what do we do with that? And how do we work through that? Because anytime you have a group of people, so if you're leading, it doesn't matter where you're leading or how you're leading or who you're leading. Anytime you bring a group of people together, what you're really doing is bringing a group of messes together, right? You've got a little bit of a mess. The person across from you's got a little bit. The person on the other side of everybody's got a little bit of mess. It doesn't matter if it's in an e-group, if it's in a family, if it's in a workplace, in an organization like a church. It doesn't matter where it is, but we all have, when we get into groups, mess begins to amplify mess, and it begins to amplify mess. So as leaders, no matter where you are, no matter what you're doing, it just becomes really, really important that we get this right. Because what we know is this: when we have a mess, when we see that mess, maybe it's somebody you're seeing at work or wherever it is. I'll let you kind of pick up the imagery and the illustration, but wherever you see that mess, we're faced with two choices. And they're pretty obvious choices. One is to walk away, right? To wash your hands, say, I don't want to have anything to do with this drama. I don't want to have anything to do with what's going on. So I'm just going to wash my hands and walk away from what's going on right now. And I'll tell you this is something that I've done. So I've been in ministry now for just over 10 years. And when I started in ministry, I had this sort of mentor relationship where I was mentoring a younger fellow, and we had a really, really good relationship, but he was actually pretty needy in what he needed from me. I loved him. I still love him. He's a fantastic person. but he had a lot of needs. And I'll never forget, there was one night, it was about 2 o'clock in the morning, and I heard my phone vibrate. And I roll over and I open it up and I look at it, and it's this guy. And he's saying, I need your help. I need you right now. Now, if you've ever been in this where you help people out, you know that sometimes you cry wolf and you cry wolf and you cry wolf. So this is one of those situations where it's like, do I actually pay attention to this? And I didn't. I put the phone down, I rolled over, and I went back to sleep. In the morning, I wake up to a whole bunch more messages saying, I need your help. I need your help. I need your help. And he was going through a crisis, which was very real and very powerful to him in that moment. But I chose to walk away. I chose to wash my hands of it and say, you know what? I've done my time here. I don't need to be a part of this. I'm just gonna walk away from this. And still to this day, I use that story all the time because it's a reminder that I could have done something. I could have been a part of it. Now, thankfully, his story has worked out really well. But we all know, we've all had situations, or we've heard of situations where somebody could have said something, but then something happened and they could no longer say that one thing, or they could no longer forgive, or they could no longer apologize, or they could no longer make it right in that relationship because maybe somebody had moved away or they passed away or whatever it is, right? So we have these messes where we could walk away. That's option number one. Option number two is just as obvious as option number one, and that's to get involved, right? To get involved in what's going on around us. I think this is so, so important. Now, we know that getting involved is the right thing to do. It's the obvious thing to do. On paper, we're all going to say, of course, we'll get involved. We know that. We know we're going to do that. But when push comes to shove, I find myself, I'll only speak for myself when I say this, but I find for myself, there's often times where it's like, do I really want to get involved? Right? Sometimes you do, sometimes you don't. I want to tell you two quick stories of times where I've really seen this ability to walk towards the mess, to move towards the mess, really make a difference in people's lives. The church we were at before, I served as the group's pastor. So I really saw my role. We had about 95 group leaders, and my job was really to pastor those leaders so that they could pastor the people in their group. And one of the cool things that we saw was just an inherent sense of care from the people leading the groups, caring for the people in their groups. And I'll never forget the day where I got a text from somebody in a group, and they said, hey, listen, here's the situation. And what had happened is somebody in their group, the husband had been having an affair and made some really, really bad choices, and the wife had no idea what was going on. And together they had 3 little kids. And so as a church, we're trying to wonder, what can we do? How can we be a part of this? And so these 3 kids had a leader in their version of Sunday school. And so I reached out to the leader and I said, hey, listen, here's a situation. I'll give you all the details I can. Can you help? Like, just take the kids out for ice cream, get them out of the house because things are going to go sideways. Can you help? And she said, listen, don't say anything more. I've got it from here. And as I tell this story, we're now 6 or 7 years later. What you see from that day, and still to this day, you see where this leader is posting pictures of her and the kids on Instagram going for coffee or for ice cream or going for walks. She's babysitting them. She's gotten involved in their lives. With the wife, she's gotten involved with her, and she's helped her walk through some incredibly difficult times. She's gone with her to counseling appointments. She's gone with her to every sort of appointment with lawyers and to court, just to be along and to be alongside of her. And it's been so powerful to watch that happen. Somebody just deciding to move toward the mess. Second thing comes from actually right here in Emmanuel. And it's a tough story to tell because it's one that's actually still being written, I think, in so many ways right now. But so many of you, if you've been following us on Instagram or on Facebook, or if you watched the service this past Sunday, you heard about the story of Sonia and Jaden. Now, if you go back a little bit ago, they find out that they're pregnant. Then they find out that they're having twins. This is a young couple, all new to them, right? They find out not only they're having twins, but there's some concerns. They go to Toronto. They find out that one of the babies is born. And we find out this past weekend that one of the boys has passed away and has gone to be with Jesus. Incredibly tragic. But let me tell you what I've seen during this time that so many of you have not been able to. Is you see this time where somebody saw a mess that no one created, but they wanted to be a part of it. And so Brenda Wolf, who serves as our financial manager here at the church, it tugged on her heartstrings because she could resonate with the situation. And she got involved. And let me tell you guys, what happened was absolutely incredible. Not only raising money, which is important and it's needed, but she did a great job of helping spur that on. But Brenda actually went out of her way, and she went so far as to find a church in Toronto who would support these people, this young couple, while they're in Toronto, through meals and through visitation and through help and just everything. Brenda went so far as to help find accommodations for them and to get advice and help walk through that. And it's just been absolutely powerful to see what Brenda's done with this couple. And then actually to see Pastor Mike, who's going to join us in a little bit, get involved as well. And Mike knows from a year ago what it's like to be in a hospital with kids. And so Mike made the choice to jump in and have some conversations with them as well. Pastor Dave, same thing. And it's been so cool to see so many people get so involved in this young couple's life, all because they made the choice to walk towards a mess. And I've been so encouraged to see it. So those are just two stories that I wanted to share with you because I think they're important. And I think they give us a picture of, man, like there can be some really big things in there. But let me tell you that these are stories that begin to change lives and they begin to change stories for people, right? It can take somebody from going down the wrong path and put them on the right path. It can take somebody who's not following Jesus. Maybe they never heard of Jesus, and you can use this as an opportunity to introduce people to Jesus. So what I love about this idea of walking towards the mess is much like last week when we talked about this idea of the 3 A's, this idea of moving towards a mess, it's sort of biblical, but it's also not biblical. So no matter where you are, I think you can access this and you can make sense of it. But because I am speaking from an office in a church, I do want to share a little bit of a story from Scripture that I think begins to paint this picture, and it shows us what it looks like to walk away, but also to be a part of the conversation. And this comes from Jesus chapters, or from Jesus, I'll get it together yet. It comes from Luke chapter 7, where Jesus is going to this dinner party that Simon has invited him to, and they come across this woman who walks in. And let me just tell you a little bit of the story. We're not going to unpack much of the story, but I just want you to hear the story to know and begin to see what some of this looks like when you're reading Scripture and just kind of what you're going through in your day. So we're picking this up in Luke chapter 7, verse 36, where it says, when one of the Pharisees invited Jesus to have dinner with them, he went to the Pharisee's house and reclined at the table. A woman in that town who lived a sinful life learned that Jesus was eating at the Pharisee's house. So she came with an alabaster jar of perfume. As she stood behind him at his feet weeping, she began to wet his feet with her tears. Then she wiped them with her hair, kissed them, and poured perfume on them. And when the Pharisee who had invited them saw this, he said to himself, if this man were a prophet, he would know who he is touching and what kind of woman she is, that she's a sinner. So here we've got this woman who, she's a prostitute. She's made some really poor choices in life. She's coming into this setting with Jesus. And here's Simon saying, whoa, like back off, get away from her. He's washing his hands of what's going on. But here's what Jesus says. So Jesus answered him. He says, Simon, I have something to tell you. I love how it kind of comes across in this cavalier way. He says, Simon, I've got something to tell you. Tell me, teacher, he said. 2 people owed money to a certain moneylender. One owed him 500 denarii, the other 50. Neither of them had the money to pay him back, so he forgave the debts of both. Now, which of them will love him more? Simon replied, I suppose the one who had the bigger debt forgiven. You have judged correctly, Jesus said. Then he turned, and this is where it really, really changes for me. Because then he turned to the woman and he said to Simon, he said, do you see this woman? Do you see this woman? Now, I don't need to read the rest of the story, but I will because it's Jesus' words and I don't want to cut it off. But he said, you did not give me any water for my feet, but she wet my feet with her tears and wiped them away with her hair. You did not give me a kiss, but this woman from the time I entered has not stopped kissing my feet. You did not put oil on my head. She has poured perfume on my feet. Therefore, I tell you, her many sins have been forgiven as her great love has shown, but whoever has been forgiven little loves little. And so the one thing that I really want us to see there is where Jesus says, do you see this woman? Because of course Simon saw her. We know that he could physically see her, but did he actually see her? Did he actually see someone who needed help, and needed love and needed forgiveness, who needed support, who needed compassion? Did he actually see that in this moment? And so that's my question for you as we're thinking about this. When you think about the people who are around you, when you think about the people who are in your life, do you actually see them? Or are you having these cursory sort of, hey, how's it going? Please don't answer. How's your day? I don't really care. Right? Or are you asking the question? And one of my favorite questions is, how are you doing really? You know, are we having these conversations? Are we getting involved in the mess that shows that we can actually see the people who are around us? Because think of the story that I just read. When you think of Simon, we've all been in that spot. We've all said no. We've all said, I don't want to be a part of this. We've all felt bad for doing that, but we've all done it, right? Think of the other guests. They're blown away by Jesus's involvement here and his willingness to get involved and say, you know what? Your sins, they're forgiven, right? Think of Jesus, right? He moved towards the mess. Here's a woman who, by our standards, it would have made perfect sense for him to walk away and say, I don't want to get involved. But of course, we know this, that's not how Jesus was. But more than anything, think of the impression that that woman would have had in that moment. Put yourself in her shoes, right? She comes in. She's had a lifetime of being rejected. She's had a lifetime of being told she's not good enough. She's had a lifetime of being told that she doesn't measure up, that she's not worthy, that she just isn't good. Think of it. She walks in, she sees Jesus, and in a moment, she's accepted. In a moment, she's forgiven. And in a moment, her life changes. Now, do we know what happened to her after that? No, we don't. But in that moment, Jesus chose to show her the compassion and the care that so many of us have needed in our time at some point. Right? Simon said, you know what? I don't want to be a part of this. We get that. We understand that. Jesus said, listen, I'm going to get involved. And he did. So here's the thing, right? I think we can all get that. We can all get that. But here's the thing, that if we're going to do this, you're going to face difficulties. You're going to face some tension. You're going to face some altercations. You're going to face some mess. But the reality is it's all needed, right? It's all important because we can see that mess. We can see what's in front of us, but are we actually going to walk towards it? Are we actually going to go to it? So I want to, before we kind of talk about the how and the nuts and the bolts of it, I really want to encourage you, because I know this for a fact, because we're all in this spot where I think we all know somebody who needs our help. And how do I know that? Because even if we are not willing to admit it, all of us need somebody's help for something. It might be a character development. It might be just an opportunity to have a conversation with somebody who's a little bit wiser. It might be a career choice. It might be a lifestyle choice. Who knows what it is? But every one of us need a little bit of somebody's help. And I hope that you can see that there's somebody in your life, in your circle, who could use that help as well. So how do we do this? I've got 3 steps, and then I'm going to, in a few minutes, I'm going to invite Pastor Mike to join us. But before we do that, I want to share 3 things with you. And I think they're really, really, really important to kind of get us set up for how we can do this well and how we can move towards the mess. The first thing, because we're in a church, because this is a kind of has a Christian context and some Christian undertones, I think the first thing, when you notice a mess, when you realize it, I think the first thing that you need to do is pray. That's obvious, probably, but here's why. I want to give you 2 less than obvious reasons why, and then I'll give you a third one as well. The one that's obvious is because it just invites God into the situation. We know why that's important, right? It allows him to be in the middle of it. It allows him to be involved in this, and he can work through what else is going on. So it invites God into it. We know that. The second thing is it gives you wisdom. It gives you wisdom to say, how can I speak to this person? How can I encourage them? How can I help them? How can I walk them through this? Who can I talk to who knows what this situation is like? As a former groups pastor, and still to this day, when somebody comes to me with a problem, honestly, the first thing that goes through my mind is, okay, God, what should I be doing right now? What should I be saying? And I can't tell you how many times God has put an image of somebody in my head who's already gone through this. And I could say, hey, person A, I'm going to get you to talk to person B, because they know this way better than I do. So praying, it invites God into it, and it gives you wisdom. The third thing is it actually gives you a little bit of time. I'm typically not a big fan of this, But when you are faced with a difficult conversation or a difficult situation, it is amazing how many times adding a little bit of time as a buffer just helps it to go away. And not go away in the sense where you forget about it, but goes away in the sense of they made a better decision or they fixed it or circumstances changed or whatever it is. So I think it's really, really important that we take time to pray and to invite God into that. The second thing that I want to kind of bring to attention is to identify where that person is spiritually. As a church and as a follower of Jesus myself, this is one of the things that I often forget to do, but I think it's so, so important. If you're seeing somebody who's making choices, or they're just in a situation where they don't really, where they can't get ahead, where they're making poor choices, one of the things that I really, really want to suggest to you is to take time to identify where they're at spiritually. Now, why do we do that? Because the reality is that, one, it helps us to avoid judgment, because if they've never read scripture, then it's kind of awkward and kind of weird to measure them up against scripture, right? It doesn't mean that you don't use scripture to encourage them or to say, hey, listen, I've got this great story that I think might help. We do that. We need to do that all the time. But if your neighbor's never gone to church, doesn't care about church, doesn't care about Jesus, it's kind of weird to hold them to that standard without a little bit of context, right? So understanding where they are spiritually helps you to kind of walk them through that. And the other part of that is it just helps you to personalize it and helps you to say, should I be, does it look different to pray with them versus praying for them? Does it look different to bring them to church versus inviting them to church? Whatever it is. But when you can identify where they're at spiritually, it allows you to identify exactly how you can help them specifically. The third thing is, and I think this is so, so, so important, because this is one of those things that I forget to do all the time. And that, as you're thinking about what's going on in somebody else's life, we need to take time to examine where our own hearts are at in this situation. So we need to examine our own hearts. What are my motives? Why do I want to fix what that person is doing? Why do I want to change that? Why does it matter to me and to what's going on in this? What am I trying to accomplish here? There's somebody in my life who is really, really smart and dropped this quote on me. And many of you have probably heard this before, but where he said the idea that what irritates us the most about other people is most often the thing that we want to fix about ourselves. What irritates us most about others is what we want to fix about ourselves. That's pretty powerful when you think about it, right? Because if you stop and you look at that person who's making all these foolish choices and you take time to examine, it's like, oh man, like those are actually the things that my wife would say are drive her crazy about me, right? Or that's what I know I need to change about myself. So when we can stop, when we can do this, I think it's so, so important to examine our own hearts. Are we actually in this because we see somebody making a poor choice, or are we getting into this for our own motives, for our own agenda, to make what we want happen in this situation? So that, I think, is so important. What am I trying to do here? So when you are thinking about the mess that you need to get involved with, that you want to be involved with, are you taking time to stop to pray, to invite God into it, to invite his wisdom and the wisdom of other people, and really just to allow time? Are you taking time to identify where they're at spiritually, right? So that you can avoid judgment and hypocrisy, and then to personalize the care that you want to give to them. And then are you taking time to examine your own heart and see sort of where you're at and what you want to accomplish, and more importantly, what God wants to accomplish in that? And my friends, I think if we can do that, it allows us these sort of checkpoints along the way, right? Have I prayed? Yes. Have I examined? Yes. Have I identified? Yes. And it allows us to continue to put their care, their hope, their future before us, before anything else. And I think it's so, so important. So in just a second, I'm going to invite Pastor Mike to speak a little bit. And I think I see some questions. So if you have questions, or you just have something that you want to offer, I would love it if you would jump in and maybe you've got a quote, maybe you've got a thought. I would love to hear it. But I think just as we get Mike in here, I think this is one of those things that's really, really important, because you know this. Okay, there's two really, really important things that I think we forget about when it comes to dealing with messy people. One is boundaries. We need to have those boundaries in our lives, because sometimes, like I've said this to people, and other people have said it in situations that I've been walking alongside others to say, hey, listen, I love you. I care about you, but I need to put these things in place because we can't continue the way we've been continuing because of the choices you've been making. I want to encourage you. We could spend a whole hour talking about boundaries, but I want to really encourage you to be thinking about boundaries and to know that you can place boundaries in relationships. It's so important and it's so needed. So many times as Christians, sometimes we try not to do that because we think we should be able to fix everything. The second thing, and this is what I'm going to actually ask Mike to speak on, is this idea of having difficult conversations. And if you are going to get involved in other people's messes, I guarantee you're going to have to be a part of a difficult conversation. And I'm just patiently waiting to see if Pastor Mike is going to join us here. He is working his way in, I can see.
You should be there.
Is he there?
Yeah, I see myself.
Oh, there you are. Hi, buddy.
Hey.
I couldn't see. I changed the view. So
okay, that makes sense.
Hey, now we're back. This is awesome. So we've got Kyle. Kyle's still hidden, but he can make himself visible as well. We've got a whole bunch of questions. So Mike, I'm going to make you answer. I haven't looked at the questions yet. I may not have the answer to them, but you probably do. So before we get there though, Mike, you've had some experience talking, doing difficult conversations and leading in grace and leading in love with some of those things. So can you just tell us a little bit more about what it looks like for you to have a difficult conversation with someone else?
Yeah, I would say that for me, what's really changed fairly recently in my life is being in ministry. So before that, I was running my own marketing business, and yeah, like difficult conversations were pretty regular there when it's, you have to talk to a client about, what you're doing actually is hurting your business. That's one thing. And then having an employee that you need to let go, that's a whole other thing. And I would say the hardest conversations that I've had are ones that are linked to ministry, especially when you work with volunteers who are there to serve, and they're unpaid and wanting to contribute. And that makes the situation really difficult. So specifically there was in my last job in Winnipeg, we had a musician who had been there for well over 20 years. She was very experienced, and what had happened is word started to get to me that there was some unease and some tension. She didn't want to speak to me about it, but when I heard about it, I realized, okay, this needs to be addressed, but it needs to be done so in a tasteful way. So what I did was I'll say I walked towards the mess. I asked her to have a meeting, and in this case, this is what I did was I basically have 3 steps before I go into a meeting like this. So the first thing I do is I do my research and start asking the question, why is this person acting this way? So in this case, the person was against a lot of my leadership decisions and trying to get others to follow her in those thoughts. So initially it hurts me, right? I feel there, I can't help but feel a little bit offended, and I feel a little bit of tension there. So the flip side of it is for me to ask, why is this person acting in this way? What is it that's so valuable to them that they want to hold on to that I'm not attentive to? The second thing is I prior to the meeting, I do everything I can to create a healthy image of the person in my mind. Because it's very easy when there's a lack of communication to fantasize the negative in people, especially when they're opposing your own view. So I actually take this time, and I'll say I do it like you said. Prayer is a big part of it, because what prayer does is heightens your awareness, and I believe that when you pray, you actually gain compassion in the situation. So in that, I then try to see a healthy image of this person in my mind. And then the third thing I do is I create a goal that goes beyond the initial conversation. So if the goal is, let's say there's a behavior that you want to correct. So in this case, the behavior is speaking to others rather than speaking to me, and like I'll say poisoning the well a little bit. if that's the behavior I'm trying to correct, I try to create a goal beyond that. So the way the meeting went was I had met with this person, and I was very upfront. I said a handful of people gave me their permission, and they're fine with me naming them. They had said this, and I believe that this is something that we need to have a conversation about, because I would like to fix this. And that's usually kind of the hardest part, and you might get a little bit of backlash in that moment. But if you just let the person speak, and even vent a little bit, you start to hear what it is that is so meaningful to this person. And this person that I was speaking to, turns out they had such a huge heart for some of the other musicians that had been there for a long time as well, that were worried about the technological advances that we were making. She was on board with the advances, but she was concerned about so many other people. So she had this, I'll even say, like, this pastoral heart for members of the community that I was still so new. I didn't know how hard this was for some of them. And throughout the conversation, what ended up happening was, because there was this healthy view of this person, and me knowing how long she had been there, the goal that I had set was, at the end of this meeting, my goal is for her to be a leader, to be named publicly and acknowledged by both her peers and our community as a leader. And it took a lot of due diligence in the conversation, so it was a long one. But in the end, she had felt heard, she had felt respected, she had felt that the people that she was concerned about were cared for, and she had then felt empowered. And that made that one of the more successful meetings that I had that started with a difficult conversation. Her influence, that saved me a ton of work and a ton of pain for other people that I was unaware of.
Yeah. One of the things you said, Mike, there that I want to pick up on is when you're trying to create a healthy image of somebody. I think we've probably talked about this at some point. But for me, just tell me if I'm off base on this. For me, I find that if you've acted in a certain way, if you've said something and I don't have all the answers, I'm going to connect all those dots in the most malicious of ways, right? We could have been getting coffee this morning, and you could have just, I put my coffee mug in the maker and you walk away and what's this guy's deal? Right? I'm going to create the most unfortunate scenario in my head. Whereas the reality is you had to go make a phone call or whatever it was. Right.
Right.
Yeah.
And that's where I believe that empathy is one of the most underrated tools of a leader, and especially a person that's going to be going in conversations like that regularly. And I'll say especially in ministry, but that if leaders in corporate settings too would grow their empathy skills, I do believe we would see massive change in workplace structures. And you can apply that to family life. You can apply it everywhere.
What do you think is the ultimate goal? If you could pick one word for it, or one, and you and I haven't asked you this question, so we'll see where it goes. But if you had one goal for any difficult conversation, what is it? If you could just summarize that, and you kind of touched on this already in your answer before, but if you had one goal, what is that for the individual?
For the individual, yeah. If it's a leadership conversation, I would say, how do you empower this person? My goal is to always, if you can empower a person and have that trust to empower them, it can save you a lot of work and make you a lot more effective, but it also can positively impact a lot of people, especially like the mental boost that gives to people too. When you feel empowered by someone who has a role of leadership, it's so important. If you can bring them up, like if you can bring yourselves to the same level, essentially, that's going to work wonders.
Yeah. I would have said the exact same thing. I would have said, like, if you and I have to have a difficult conversation, I just want to see you win. Yeah. Right. I want to see you succeed. I want to see you be awesome at leading worship and leading people and leading staff and whatever it is you do. I think we want to see that, right? We want to see people win in what they're doing. And I think especially in the church, we get really kind of guilty of this idea of, hey, I love you, Mike, therefore I'm not going to have a difficult conversation with you. Not everybody's that way, of course not. But
right.
We do a good job of just oh, if I love Mike, then I better not have this difficult conversation. But the opposite is true, isn't it?
Yeah. And I think a huge question that's often overlooked is why. Is the why behind anything. And that can go straight to half of the conversations that when me and my wife have them that are considered arguments. One of us forgot to ask the question why first.
Yeah. Yeah. I think the other thing too that we sort of miss in difficult conversations, or not miss, but I really need to go into every conversation is just with, and this kind of goes back to my point about connecting the dots in the most malicious of ways. And it goes back to what you're saying as well, is just leading with grace and with love and saying, hey, like I may not know all the answers. So one of my favorite phrases is help me understand. Hey, I saw you do this. Help me understand. What were you thinking? Like, why did you make that choice? Or why did you do that or do this or say that or say whatever? And just to lead with that grace to say, hey, I don't know all the answers. I'm just observing something. And maybe once you have that little bit of information, it all makes sense. And there's really no mess to be cleaned up there. So now we're going to answer some questions. Do you have time to hang out for a minute and answer a couple of questions for me?
Sure do.
Awesome. And Kyle, if you want to jump back in, you can see the questions as well, Kyle. So if you want to jump in, and if anybody else has questions, I would love it if you would drop them into the Q&A down at the bottom there. And somebody did ask if I answered this one already, but somebody did say, is Mike the lead singer of a band called The Boy in the Sea? He looks familiar. I heard they were K-pop. So is that true?
Nope. It's a rumor. I get it all the time.
Yeah. So anyway, Mike is the lead singer of that band, and they're pretty awesome. Great songwriting. I will just throw that out. It's very good songwriting. So you weren't looking for a compliment, but you got it. So
wow, thank you.
So, okay, I'm just going to go through the questions here. And there's 3 right now that I want to kind of talk to, because I think they're very, very important questions. So either of you can weigh into this, but is there a limit to how far we get involved in somebody's mess? More importantly, how do we know when we've hit that limit? I'll throw out some thoughts while, if you guys have anything to add, you can. But I think this is where boundaries become so, so important, right? Because we know we've all seen situations, whether it's in our kids, whether it's in friends or whatever it is, where one person's bad decisions have dragged other people down or towards something that they weren't going to. So I think boundaries are incredibly, incredibly important. And we need to be quick to use them and to say, hey, listen, you can't keep doing that, or I can't keep coming around. I think it's so important. But so I said this earlier in my talk, but I just want to continue to give people permission to be quick and to be as liberal as you need to be with throwing out boundaries. Boundaries can be temporary, they can be permanent, but to be quick with using them. So do you guys have any thoughts?
Yeah, I would also say to communicate the boundaries, right? So with this couple that you were mentioning, with the ones with the difficult health situation with their kid, it's that's a person who I was asked to walk alongside, and very quickly we've grown very close in this time. And in the trauma, though, you have to be attentive to where this person's heart is at, as well as yours. So we set boundaries, but to set the boundaries and communicate them, where I'm like, I'm going to check on you at this time and this time every day. You are welcome to call me at any time. I can say that, or I can say you're welcome to call me anytime between here and here. The boundaries are important, but they need to be clearly communicated, I would say.
Yeah, I would say it's about not letting other people, I guess, dictate your life or your schedule. Like, you obviously set your boundaries, but the tension obviously is that, self-sacrifice is also a scriptural concept, right? And so I think it's just one of those, you need to, you talked about prayer a lot, right? Just like, that's just where wisdom and discernment comes in as well. Boundaries are key, but not to the point where you kind of totally cut the other person out too, right? But
yeah. All right, I'm going to move to a second question, and Mike, you may be able to speak to this too, just from life experience, but also from kind of where you're at with this couple, because geographically you cannot solve all of their problems. So the question is, and I'm just going to read it verbatim, is it says, I have a heart to help people, which is phenomenal, but I also know I have limited resources and capabilities to help others. What should I do when I know I'm out of my league or not able to help because of my capabilities? I think that's an awesome question. If you're asking that question, that's a fantastic start to know that you don't have all the answers. So, Matt, applaud for getting that. That's a great start.
Well, yeah, and I would say if you're the honesty with yourself, there's nothing weak about telling a person that you feel limited as well. I have never experienced the loss of a child, and when this father called me moments after he lost his baby, I'm at instantly, if you haven't experienced that, there's nothing you can do.
Yeah.
I sat on the phone and I wept with him, and that was for a half hour. I had no advice. I didn't say it's going to be okay. It was a half hour of both of us breaking, him just knowing someone else was there. I prayed for him afterwards, but I know where he's at right now. The prayer wasn't what meant. It didn't mean the same thing to him as just simply having another broken person.
Mm.
And that goes a long way.
Yeah. Yeah. One of the things that stood out to me. So at our previous church, I was sort of responsible for care and for helping people, not myself, but sort of being a bit of an air traffic controller and getting people the help they needed. And one of the things that one of our professional counselors told me, he used a phrase, he says, listen, he says, if anybody ever says to you, I'm not a counselor, but he says, stop listening to them. Like, surround yourself with, and he was saying this not just about him, but about his profession. He says, surround yourself with professional counselors who have not just years of education, but decades of experience and continued education to be able to help. And you're uniquely gifted, Mike, to help this couple to an extent, right? You know what it's like to be sitting beside a hospital bed, not knowing the outcome. But you, as you identified, you don't know what goes next and
Right.
and what happens. And one of the things that always stood out to me is, I don't know how true this is. Other people can confirm or deny this, but I think it's true that when people are in that situation, I think just to give people permission to let themselves off the hook a little bit, is that in that situation, if you ask the husband, the father, if you ask him in 2 years from now or 5 years from now, okay, if you ask the question, what did someone say to you? My guess is they wouldn't have a clue what words you used, but they'd be able to identify that Mike was there. And they remember who was there. They may or may not remember what was said. And I think that's so important, to just let yourself a little bit off the hook. And especially in tragedy and very acute situations like that, just to be present is such a massive, massive head start.
Makes me think of 2 Corinthians chapter 1 a little bit. It doesn't really address the question per se, but where Paul talks about experiencing God's comfort. And I mean, I'll just read a couple verses here, but it says, all praise to God, the Father of our Lord Jesus Christ. God is our merciful Father and the source of all comfort. He comforts us in all our troubles so that we can comfort others. When they are troubled, we will be able to give them the same comfort that God has given us. And so to me, I mean, what Mike was talking about, he hasn't experienced the loss of a child. And so I guess in some ways his ability to comfort somebody in that scenario is limited, because he doesn't have the experience of being comforted in that scenario. But yeah, being able to use our own pain and our own suffering even to serve others better.
Yeah, that's awesome. Last question, and Kyle, I'm going to ask you because I think you, well, you're smarter than me, and I think you're smarter than Mike, but this isn't a question that has anything to do with intelligence. Of course it doesn't, but it's a very valuable question. So I talked about the idea of identifying where somebody's at spiritually so you can know how to better help them and really tailor the experience if you can. So the question stands, and it's a perfect question, is how do you measure where someone is at spiritually?
Yeah, well, the note right after that question says that it seems really difficult to measure, and I would just echo that right away.
Yeah.
Oh, man. Yeah,
Mike, you can jump in too if you've got wise things to say.
I think the piece that just has to be acknowledged right away is that at the end of the day, no measurement we make is going to be perfect. It's not like there's a measuring tape for this kind of thing. Yet, I think there are certain benchmarks. I mean, Brendan mentioned, first of all, like, do they follow Jesus or not? Like that's maybe not black and white, but it's a relatively good starting point. Like if they just simply don't follow Jesus, then that's going to obviously change the way that you approach the situation. Things like biblical authority maybe wouldn't hold as much weight while you're walking alongside that person. But yeah, I don't know. That'd be a starting point. I'd have to think a little longer yet, but
yeah, I think you're spot on. Just identifying, have you seen them in church before? It's a great start. Do you follow Jesus? I think one of the biggest things that we can do is ask. If you really don't know, to be able to ask. And sometimes that can be an ask of, hey, I believe in prayer. Like, are you okay if I pray for you right now? Or, have you, like, just asking the question, do you go to, if you don't know, right? Do you go to church? Do you do great. Do you have you put your faith and your trust in Jesus? You have, great. Like, I think to give that freedom to ask that question. Now I'll be the first to say it before somebody else jumps up and says it, is that can be off-putting for people who aren't in the church. So that's where discernment, I think, comes in. And just, you've started with prayer, so hopefully you've gotten a little bit of wisdom and discernment in where that person's at. But Mike, do you have any thoughts? You can say no.
Well, it was essentially where Kyle was going there. There's a level of accountability that you can raise as soon as you know that a person is a follower of Christ.
Yep.
And then there's either scenario needs grace, but then there's a lot more tact if the person doesn't know Christ, because now all of a sudden you're also representing Jesus in that moment too. So that's when following his example of standing on both grace and truth is really important, and can still be inspiring to a person in those moments that doesn't have a relationship with Christ.
Yeah. And the only other thing I would add is, depending on what it is, sometimes it doesn't matter. Right? Like, when I think of this couple, they're in Toronto, just knowing Brenda's heart and knowing where she's at. And I think I can say the same thing for you too, Mike, is that she would have jumped in and helped regardless, just because she felt a connection to them. And that's practical, pragmatic help. It's not spiritual help. Two very different things. But I'm just saying, in certain situations or certain parts of a situation, it may not matter where that's spiritually. So even though I said that, I believe it. I believe it's true. But sometimes it doesn't have it doesn't carry the same weight. So yeah, if there's any other questions, I would love to try to take a run at them. But in the meantime, I don't have anything else. So I'm going to pass it back to Kyle here in a second. And I'm going to thank Mike for joining us. But just a reminder to everybody that you have permission to go into people's, to see people, right? To what Jesus did, to see where they're at, to jump in, and you don't have to get it right. You don't have to be perfect, but to be involved and to do everything you can to help them get out of that mess. So that's all I got. Kyle.
Awesome. Thanks, Brendan. Really appreciate it. Let's see if I can get my video on here.
You are on.
I am on. Okay,
Yep.
Good. Awesome. Then I'll just close with a couple announcements or just to kind of go over what we've got on the docket for this week. So just a reminder to all you guys that we are in week 2 of May sessions of a total of 4 weeks. So tomorrow we've got Kent doing his second session on parenting. That one's titled Being a Dazzling Parent in a Frazzling World. And then on Thursday, we've got Tom Peters coming in for week 2 of our special topics. And he's going to be talking about counseling and how it relates to our growth as Christians. So yeah, hope to see you guys all there, and hope that you can really take advantage of these sessions that we've got going on. So thank you guys for participating. Really appreciate it.
Thank you, everybody.